Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's event. And this is going to be a good one, how not to be boring on government social media. And if there's a place you don't want to be boring, it's going to be in West Hollywood. This is Morgan Wright. I'm a senior fellow for government technology. This is going to be fun. I'm excited to be today's moderator. I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us. Time is a precious commodity, so we're going to make good use of it for you today. We've got an informative session for the next 60 minutes. Now, before we begin, there's always a little bit of housekeeping. We'll make a recording of this presentation, and we'll email it to everybody within 48 hours. Now, you can use this recording for your reference, or feel free to pass it along to your colleagues. And we encourage you to share this. That's one of the best ways. We know everybody can't attend, but please share. That's the whole purpose of social media. Now, this webcast is also interactive. And, folks, we encourage you, please participate in the Q&A. You're going to see a Q&A button at the bottom left of your presentation panel. Keep your questions coming. I'm going to field these questions, the ones that we can answer. Minor stuff we'll take care of. Any technical questions, our crack support team will take care of those for you as well. Now, if you want to download a PDF of the slides for today, you can do so by clicking on the Webinar Resources widget at the bottom of your console. Now, during today's webinar, hey, shoot-outs, do some shout-outs on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. If you do Twitter or Facebook or even LinkedIn, use the hashtag GTLive to connect with everybody, and that way we can track what you guys are saying about us, and if it's good, we're going to send you a door prize. Hey, now, also at the close of the webinar, we encourage you, we'd like to get a brief survey about the presentation. Let us know what you think if you're unable to stay with us for the entire webinar, but would like to complete the survey. As much as you can, please click on the red survey widget at the bottom of the screen to launch it. Otherwise, it'll pop up once the webinar is done. Now, at this time, before we start our show, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. If you're experiencing any media player issues or any other problems, we have a webcast help guide. Just click on the help button at the bottom of the console. So, folks, hey, joining me today to discuss this is going to be fun because when I tell you what's coming up, you guys don't want to miss this. This is Brett White. He's the digital media coordinator for the city of West Hollywood, and Anil Chawla, the founder and chief executive for ArchiveSocial. Always great to have the CEO on the line. So, but before we get started here, folks, and this obviously, sorry about that, there's our pretty pictures. There's Brett, me, and Anil. So what we're going to do, let's talk a little bit about, hey, we've done the introductions. We're going to set the stage. Brett's going to come on and tell you how not to be boring on government social media. Anil's going to talk about real-world examples of this. Then we're going to hop into our live Q&A. So let me introduce myself. As again, I said my name's Morgan Wright, and but what is that? You look up there. What does that mean? Well, that's binary for my name. It's about ones and zeros. Ultimately, everything you do is about ones and zeros. Everything on social media, Twitter, Facebook. At some point, it's got to be data, metadata. It's all ones and zeros. But the real question is, how do you do it? How do you manage it? So what I want to do is just give you guys. I just want to do a quick introduction of the city of West Hollywood. Most of you may know it for this. This is Sunset Boulevard. Yes, the infamous Sunset Strip. Movie stars, iconic walks, things that you can see. This is where it is at night. Just some beautiful pictures. Now, it is known for a lot of movies. I think one of the most iconic movies ever made in West Hollywood was, yes, Night at the Roxbury. It's just, it's going to go down in history as one of the great films. However, the Roxbury itself did not survive, and now it's called the Pink Taco. So let's move on. So those are that's the introduction to West Hollywood. You'll see Brett's going to have some fun with this. But let's talk about three things. Like in Sesame Street, today's presentation brought to you by the number 3. 3 things we want to talk about. Social media recon. We're going to give you an overview of what's going on out there. Bits, bytes, and barristers. Why sometimes the things that you do, remember those ones and zeros, get the legal team involved. And then can you actually tame this beast? We're going to find out here real quick. Let's talk about the first thing, the social media recon. For some of you, it's going to feel like you're herding cats, quite frankly. You get a lot of great internet memes out there, but you think, man, there's just so much stuff to do, and it's going to feel like Mission Impossible. At some point, you're going to expect Tom Cruise or Ethan Hunt to come, rappelling down into your room to try to help you. Folks, that's not going to happen. And here's why. This is actually a little bit dated. I wanted to find the right picture, get the right graphics for this. We have gone from 2010 to about 70 million smart devices being sold a quarter to 300 million. Apple posted staggering profits. I mean, they just crushed it with some of the iPhone 6 stuff. So we are becoming a more mobile society. We're reaching out a lot more. People have an expectation that they can get information and have customer service more rapidly than ever before. It's no longer the 8 to 5. So those are some of the things that are changing the expectations of the citizenry. Now, but the other thing, anytime you have technology and you have policy issues, then we have to deal with legal issues. So what are one of those? Well, one of those right now is social speech protected? Are there First Amendment issues? So, an article out of the New York Times, even if it enrages your boss, your social net speech is protected, except if you're a reporter and you tweet things like where they were talking about what? No overnight homicides? You're slacking, Tucson. Yes, they fired that person. That wasn't exactly protected speech. The National Labor Relations Board actually supported that finding. So, yeah, there are some limits. What is it? What can you do with it? This is where the lawyers get involved. Even with things, I'm sure this guy was just having fun, but with a fake mayor Twitter account, he sues the mayor over a real police raid. They raided his house. Apparently, he tweeted something out wrong. So social media does have a real impact. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about today is deleting Facebook posts and other stuff. Can that violate free speech? So they talked about how, the sheriff removes a Facebook page, for example, how deleting a Facebook page may violate free speech. So what happened? Sheriff removes a Facebook page, and he gets a lawsuit over it. So a lawyer writes an article saying if you delete a Facebook page, there may be legal implications. Guess what happens? The sheriff removes it. There are legal implications, and these are some of the things we're going to cover today. So many of you are going to ask, can it be done? Can we tame the beast? Well, again, another famous internet meme, Grumpy Cat says, is it possible to tame it? Am I going to fail? Well, the Grumpy Cat says no, but we think you can, and we're going to show you how. So, folks, October is National Cybersecurity Month. We want to make sure that everybody's safe out there. Yes, this is Forrest Gump. We did crack his password. Yes, cue the groans now. It was Forrest 1. So I'm going to dispense with that. Wanted to have a little fun because this is about how not to make social media boring. So we wanted to have a little fun leading into this. So, and folks, yes, now time for our show. But before I introduce Brett, let's do a quick poll. So what you guys are going to see now is let's get your opinion on social media as a public record. It's definitely a public record by law, some of you say. It might be a record, but our activity is not worth retaining. I feel strongly that it is not a public record, or you don't know. So again, is it a public record by law? It might be a record, but it's not worth retaining. You feel that it's not a public record, or you don't know. So let's take a look at what those results are. So that's pretty interesting. Many of you say it's definitely a public record. Some of you say 13% say it might be a record, but it's not worth retaining, which is good. Most people say that you feel strongly it's not a public record. Nobody said that. And some of you aren't sure. We're actually going to answer those questions because we have a different poll coming up. So now I have the great joy to introduce you to Brett White, the Digital Media Coordinator for the City of West Hollywood. Now, Brett specializes in the management of public sector digital, social, and emerging media and web services. He's been with the City of West Hollywood, or as they say, WeHo, for nearly 2 decades. 2 decades, folks, and he still looks good. You see his picture in his role as the Digital Media Coordinator, and he successfully launched and nurtured an award-winning web and social media presence that's recognized as unparalleled by many cities across the nation. And when you hear some of the stuff coming up, you'll see he's got his hands full. In addition to his role as the Digital Media Coordinator, or the DMC, Brett is also a member of the city's Innovation Catalyst Group. They're tasked with developing innovative ideas, adopting new technologies, finding the best solutions available to address the needs of the city and the community. And when you are the city of West Hollywood and all this history, folks, you got to be on top of your game. So, hey, Brett, let's see what kind of game you got. Let's turn this presentation over to you.
Thank you, Morgan. I'm really excited to be here today. As you stated, yes, I'm the Digital Media Coordinator for the City of West Hollywood. I'm within the Communications Division. My primary duties, as you stated, are here to manage the city's website and, of course, its social media program. And I'm here today to tell you a little bit about some of the strategies we use here at the city to try to keep things interesting in social media. Now, just to give you a little bit of background about our social media presence, we like to consider ourselves early adopters. We launched Twitter and Facebook back in 2008. There's a little picture of our first cute little tweet. And we've since grown our social media program into over 33 different accounts on over a dozen different platforms. Now, I say that, but don't let that fool you. We're really only active on about half of those, and most of that activity is primarily centered on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And you can see some of the cumulative numbers on these platforms. Not too shabby for a city of our size. We've only got about 35,000 people here. We also do have a YouTube channel, and I'm going to touch on that in a few minutes. Let me tell you a little bit about the organization and its approach to social media. Perhaps the largest hurdle is getting organizational buy-in with social media, and I'm happy to say that our organization understands how critical social media is. They're very supportive of what we do here, if not downright encouraging us to continue what we do here. And because of that, they do provide us the resources we need to accomplish some great things. I mean, they understand that we have a large demographic that doesn't necessarily pay attention to traditional media. They don't read news releases. They probably don't go to our website, but they're always connected on social media. And the city understands that it's critical to put our messages where we know we're going to find these people, and that, of course, is on social media. You know, just because we're a government entity, that doesn't mean people are going to pay attention to us. I mean, seriously, government is by default boring. I hate saying that, but it's really hard to make an argument against that fact. And the reality is, we're out here competing with incredibly savvy media outlets and content creators. And we can't just sit back and rest on our bureaucratic laurels and expect people to listen or pay attention to us. It's just not going to work. So, sorry, lost my place on my slide. If your social media game sucks, no one's going to listen. So how do we get their attention? Because once you get their attention and you keep it, they'll be there listening when you need to get those important messages to them. So here's what we do. We give them something to look at. Imagery. We incorporate eye candy whenever we can. And we have some really good photographers on contract that we rely heavily upon. And they give us a whole plethora of compelling images. And we've built up quite an extensive photo archive, most of which is accessible on our Flickr site. And we use and repurpose these photos all the time in what we do on social media. We also like to give them something to laugh at. Humor. I mean, this is a given. People like to laugh, right? And if their government can make them laugh, that's going to leave an impression. We give them something to be proud of. Emotions. It's equally effective. I mean, civic pride or, that feeling of the community coming together, we want to share that with them. Another important thing is we're not afraid to get in there and mix it up. We speak snark. This example from an arguably poorly worded water conservation tweet left the door open for a snarky reply, and sure enough, someone took a jab at us. Now, we could have chosen to correct the tweet and apologize for the ambiguous messaging, but we decided to play back, and we won him over. So don't be scared. Get in there and mix it up. We also know our audience, and we like to play to our audience. If you monitor social media long enough, you're going to see who gets the retweets or the likes and the shares. These are the people you want to look to interact with. These are the people you want as your allies. These are the people you want helping you get your messages out. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago about our YouTube channel. Well, as you can imagine, it's generally populated with city council meetings or news clips, and honestly, the amount of engagement and views we get on that channel pretty much reflects that fact. So, when we were tasked with creating several PSAs for various initiatives, including the riveting topics of crosswalk safety, a road closure, a special local municipal election, we considered our options, and we eventually looked to those influencers for help. We partnered with them in the production of the PSAs, and ultimately released those videos on their YouTube channels. I mean, the videos didn't have to come from our YouTube channel, right? It doesn't matter where the message is coming from. It's that message is going where you want it to go. And these were incredibly talented folks within the community who are intimately familiar with it. So the final product was not only awesome, the messaging was on point. And we found that these folks were absolutely excited to work with their local government because it ultimately benefited their community. You combine that enthusiasm with their massive social media following, and our series of PSAs turned into an amazing success for us. So we may know our audience a little too well. As most of you are probably aware, we're in the midst of an epic and unprecedented drought here in California. So when we were looking for ways to get our new water conservation messaging to that young demographic I mentioned earlier, we hit them where it counts. I mean, these folks are young and they are, for lack of a better word, active. So we rolled out a series of messages that featured sexy images and double entendres. I mean, we've even gone as far as using these as ads on hookup sites like Grindr. So yeah, we're going to go where we know we're going to find these folks. Speaking of provocative messaging, our free nighttime trolley, which is called The Pickup, is essentially a double entendre on wheels. It's hugely popular with the patrons of the Boys Town bar and club scene here in West Hollywood, and its social media presence plays into that demographic. I mean, we'll post photos of the patrons riding along, and we'll use sexy and tongue-in-cheek style with it, and we hit them hard with the flirtatious messaging, and they love it. We pay attention to what's happening in social media as well. What's trending? What are people tweeting about today? We use Star Wars Day to encourage people to vote. On National Dog Day, our website went down, so we threw puppies at them. And almost inexplicably, and this is kind of strange, this one tweet, for some reason, garnered a reach over 55,000. And this was simply about our website going down. A few days later, our website went down again. Yeah, we had a rough week that week. And this time we used bears. And then a surfing goat to let people know they could once again surf our website. You just want to keep it interesting, right? We draw for them. What do you mean we draw for them? What am I even talking about here? Well, on National Social Media Day, we scoured Twitter and collected select tweets about our city and had a graphic artist illustrate those tweets. And we then tweeted those illustrations back to those Twitter users as sort of a Twitter gift. And we did that throughout the day. Again, we're just trying to keep things interesting. So being creative in social media will inevitably draw attention to your organization. Some of this attention is going to be good. Some of this attention is going to be bad. So what would happen if we got a public records request from a person or entity that wasn't quite thrilled with our somewhat envelope-pushing and edgy approach to social media? How would we fulfill that request? Historically, we would have been put in a bit of a situation. We played it loose with our archiving and retention of content. Basically, the extent of our record keeping amounted to some saved email notifications and like some screenshots of deleted comments, so on and so forth. We didn't keep a record of every tweet or post that we did. And should we have received a records request for, let's say, all of our Twitter activity for a specific time period or for a specific topic, we would ultimately have told this person to just go to Twitter and find it. It wasn't necessarily the most prudent approach. So we recently chose to go with ArchiveSocial to handle the bulk of our archiving. And in no time flat, after signing up, we had a record of every piece of activity on our main platforms going back to that very first tweet I showed you. In fact, I used ArchiveSocial to compile a good portion of what I used today in this presentation. Now, Neil's going to be up in a little bit to tell you a little bit more about ArchiveSocial, so once I wrap this up. So let me wrap this up. Go forth and be interesting, people. Keep your audience coming back to you. Give them something to look at. Give them something to laugh at. Give them something. Keep it interesting, and for God's sakes, don't be boring. I'm going to pitch it back to you, Morgan. Thank you.
Hey, great. Hey, Brett, before you go,
yes.
Halloween, I know, is a momentous time. Tell everybody how big the city of West Hollywood is and how many people you expect there come October 31st.
Well, as of today, we have about 35,000 people. Come Saturday night, we're going to grow to 500,000.
And there'll be lots of social media going on with that. So,
oh, yeah,
like
totally.
I said, trick or treat. We're going to look forward to some of those tweets and Facebook posts from you. So, hey, look, guys, as you saw, Brett, great job. As you guys saw, this is all about keeping it fun. How to take the boring out of government, having been in government myself for 18 years, but in the law enforcement side where we weren't allowed to have a sense of humor, it's nice to see this kind of thing happening. So, hey, Brett, great job. So, Now the next part of this is I get to introduce Anil, and then we're going to do another quick poll. It's always great, folks, when we can have the founder and CEO on board. So Anil is the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. ArchiveSocial is a civic tech company. It specializes in archiving social media for public records requirements. Now, ArchiveSocial partnered with the state of North Carolina in 2010 to launch the world's first open interactive archive of social media. Since then, ArchiveSocial has enabled hundreds of government entities, such as San Francisco out in your folks' area, the Bay Area, Austin, the U.S. Department of Justice, to ensure long-term transparency for government social media communications. And the company was selected for the, as I like to say, the prestigious Code for America Accelerator in 2013, and in 2014, Gartner, one of the top analyst firms in the world, recognized them as a cool vendor. So, but before I turn it over to Anil, let's set Anil up here and give him something to work with. So, next question, folks. How is your agency currently retaining records of social media? Number one, we're not retaining our own records, and we rely on the networks. We take manual captures, which Brett was just talking about, screenshots, copy and paste, and you heard how painful that was. We use a personal backup tool, something like Backupify, SocialSafe. You use an automated solution for archiving. Or number five, you are already a happy ArchiveSocial customer, which we always like to hear about. So let's, as they say, let's go to the board. Let's look at the results. 80%, you're not retaining your records and rely on the networks. Well, we're going to have an eye-opener for you. About 6% take manual screenshots. Nobody uses personal backup, 6% an automated solution. And, hey, 6% already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. Anil, that is a great way to start you off on this.
Well, I would agree with that, Morgan. Thank you so much for the introduction there, and thank you to the audience. I know we have quite an audience here with us today on a Tuesday morning, learning how to not be boring on social media. And on that note, I want to say thank you to Brett out of the city of West Hollywood for his participation. I have the great privilege of working with agencies across the country on the issue of social media usage, and I do have to say that the work that Brett does is perhaps the most creative, interesting work I've seen on social media out of a government agency. So there's a lot to learn from there. Now, I think when Brett was talking, it was easy to see how West Hollywood's approach to social media creates a positive discourse, how it improves the perception of the agency. There's a lot of benefits there. But one of the questions that I often get is, how do we build that audience in the first place for all the things that a government agency has to do, like informing people about about emergencies and public safety announcements and things like that? And what I urge you to think about from Brett's presentation is how having that engaging conversation, that authentic dialogue, having some humor in it, creates an audience for you to ultimately serve when it does come to an emergency, creates an audience for you to inform when there is a crime. So it's incredibly important what West Hollywood is doing. It's not just fun, it's actually vital to the success of their agency. And so again, thank you, Brett, for sharing your story. Now, as Brett mentioned, you can be a little bit more bold as long as you know your audience and you're authentic and you're clear about your communications. But there are certain requirements that you deal with as a government agency, namely public records requirements and then record keeping around potential legal situations. So what I want to do today is really help you tackle this issue. And I'm going to do that by first sharing not only the law, the guidance that we're seeing out of California, but some real-life examples and case studies of what's happening. In the past few years, we've seen some really interesting circumstances in which social media has come into play in a legal situation. I want to talk to you about that and how record keeping and being proactive on record keeping was absolutely important for those agencies to continue doing what they're doing, continue informing the public and actually growing their social media efforts rather than having to taper back or shut down. How did they get to that point where they were keeping records? Well, in full disclosure, my company provides these services, but today I want to walk you through a handful of different approaches, ranging from the most basic to the most sophisticated, arm you with the options, and then you as an agency can evaluate those options and determine what really suits your budget and your needs. I will show you a brief demonstration of the West Hollywood archive so that you can see how West Hollywood is approaching this issue. And then, of course, we want to be here to answer your questions. So go ahead and use that Q&A window, and we'll save some time to come back to those questions at the end. Now, to dive right into the meat of the issue, what really motivates agencies and what is an obligation that an agency has is to maintain public information per your record retention requirements. And this is all driven, of course, by the California Public Records Act, which has been in place for a long time. However, one of the questions that's been around in the industry for a few years is whether or not social media is a record. I was really happy to see 80% of you acknowledge social media as a record, and another portion of you acknowledge that as a record, although I know you were uncertain about whether what you were doing really needed to be retained, and we'll tackle that. But more and more around the country, we're seeing regulatory bodies, states, and individual agencies recognizing that what you do on social media is really important. And if you go look at the law, what the law says is regardless of physical form, it may constitute a public record. So it doesn't matter if you get a crime tip on a piece of paper, a crime tip in an email, or a crime tip in a Twitter direct message. A crime tip is a crime tip, and that's really what the law has said for many years. And throughout the country, we've seen states, state libraries, state archives, Secretary of State offices come out and read the same interpretation and say, yes, regardless of physical form does mean regardless of physical form. If you're creating content that's important on social media, touching on these types of issues that we typically retain, it needs to be retained just like you would retain your email. In California, in fact, it looks like, from the best that I could tell, in the past few years, there's a lot of information sharing between cities, of course, and city attorneys. And so if you do a Google search for the phrase that I have here is social media sites are subject to the California Public Records Act, I was able to find this phrase in dozens of policies across the cities in California. So it appears that many of you and your attorneys have recognized this and put it in the policy. Having it in the policy is a great first step, and of course we'll talk about how you can actually implement that policy. And then notably on CalRIM, there is draft guidance now about social media that came out just earlier this year that talks about social media as a record. It provides the criteria for determining whether or not social media as a content is a record, and it really is the same criteria as any other record like email. And then if so, if it's a record, CalRIM explicitly guides agencies to come up with a record-keeping system that allows them to export the records out of the social networking site. So although I know the vast majority of you are relying on Facebook and Twitter today, state after state, including California, have come out to say you've got to get that data out of the social networks in your control. Because if it's out on Facebook and Twitter, it might be there today, but it might not be there tomorrow. So again, we have a link to that URL, and we'll send out these slides after the session today so that you can take a look at that yourself. So that legal guidance is really what sets us up for this discussion about social media as a record. However, I know that about 10% of you were questioning whether or not what you're doing on social media is a record or not. And I would strongly suggest that if you're doing anything on social media that involves a two-way conversation, that involves putting information out that could be helpful to citizens, then you are likely creating at least a few records over time, and if not, creating many records. The situation where you'll create the most records certainly is an emergency response. This is the kind of circumstance where something is happening. You need to get the information out very quickly. Twitter and Facebook are the best channels to disseminate information and allow it to spread virally. We've seen that happen time and time again and in various crises, including the LAX shootings a few years ago. And so you're going to create records that are unique. They're on social media. They're hard-hitting. They have important information about public safety, and they need to be retained. And just to give you a trivia fact here and to remind folks of a situation in which social media played a really important role, the Boston Marathon bombings, obviously a very tragic incident, but the Boston PD was smart to get on Twitter to start getting ahead of the information, correcting misinformation. And in fact, when they caught the terror suspect, the very first announcement that they caught the suspect was a tweet. And if you go back and look at that incident, you can see how incredibly important social media content was for ensuring public safety and getting information out. That's going to happen at every level, no matter how big or small a crisis is. Now, outside of large-scale crises or even day-to-day public safety, every agency in government fundamentally exists to serve the citizens. And if you're on social media, presumably you're there to have a two-way dialogue, to get information out to citizens, hopefully get some feedback from them. And that's a situation day to day, no matter what kind of agency you are, you're ultimately going to get some feedback from a citizen that does fall under your retention guidelines. And so if you're on social media, again, I ask you to just review the kinds of questions and comments you're getting, review the kind of information you're putting out, and it's very likely you're going to find social media records being created. Just to give you one example, this is a situation where a woman in Texas was trying to reach the Department of Transportation over the phone, and the phone line just wasn't working. She tweeted to them. They told her to try again because the phones can get busy. And ultimately, she determined that the phone number that was on a mail-out was actually incorrect. And she was able to inform the Texas DOT of this over Twitter and get their acknowledgement that they're going to take a look at this. Again, it's hopefully something that would never lead to a legal situation, but it is real customer service around information that the agency had put out that was incorrect and had to be corrected. And this is the kind of stuff that happens throughout the day. Again, some of it's mild, some of it's more meaningful, but these are records, and it's important for long-term transparency and for your legal protection to have these records. Now, I've urged you to think about your social media as a record, but your next question might be, well, who's going to ask for it? Well, this is just from about 18 months ago in the state of Washington. I happened to, honestly, very honestly, it's a true story, I happened to stumble upon this tweet in my own Twitter feeds where a citizen was following the Seattle PD's feeds, where Seattle PD is putting out information about crimes, and they actually do this in a fairly automated process where they're trying to inform the public across Twitter about crimes that are happening. A citizen noticed that some of those Twitter feeds were occasionally either delayed or seemed to be missing information. And so the citizen was concerned about this because he wanted to rely on these Twitter feeds, so he began tweeting to Seattle PD about it. And a few tweets in, he said, actually, I want the archives of all of your tweets available from each of your police beats, and please consider this a Public Records Act request. In other words, the citizen made a public records request for social media using social media. And the Seattle PD said, okay, wait a minute, go to our website and fill out a form if you want to issue a PRA request. But yes, we will fulfill this and give us 3 weeks. And this, again, was a situation where a citizen was getting some information, felt like the information was incomplete, wanted to see if the Seattle PD had the complete information and asked for it, and they were obligated to turn it over. Now, we, of course, in my shoes, I hear from agencies all the time about how social media comes into play, but it is still something that's emerging, and likely compared to the full volume of public records requests you're getting, you're probably not seeing requests that specifically ask for Facebook and Twitter content quite yet, or it's a very low volume. But what I would urge you to do is to think about the requests that you are getting and how they touch social media. What we have on the screen here are the list of common language that you see in a public records request. Any and all documents that relate to, all reports of the incident, all emails and communications. If you look at language like this, it may be tightly scoped to a street closure, but if it says all notifications of the street closure, and you use social media to notify people about this, and maybe you did it because it was the quickest way to get the information out, technically it falls under this request. And so a lot of our customers have recognized this to say, you know what, people may not have asked for Facebook and Twitter, but the way they've worded this, in fact, some of the most impactful content was on Facebook and Twitter, and it's our obligation to provide it. So speaking of real situations, I wanted to give you an overview of what we're seeing out there in the industry. Now, before I dive into some of the specific instances that we hear from our customer base, there is a more well-known case which was really nationally recognized as perhaps the first legal incident around government social media taken to court. And it brings up a key question that we often hear from agencies. It centers around the agency's ability to remove and moderate content. Basically, in 2012, I believe, the city of Honolulu, Hawaii, had a situation in which a advocacy group was posting content on their social media about gun control and gun rights. And the city felt like that content wasn't terribly relevant, and they decided to remove that content. This group then turned around and filed a lawsuit alleging that they have a First Amendment freedom of speech right to express their opinion on this important issue. This case did go to court, and it raised concerns about whether cities and agencies can remove content or whether it has to be a completely open forum protected by First Amendment. This was not ruled upon. The city ultimately settled the case by paying for the plaintiff's attorney's fees, but it raised some interesting issues. What we at ArchiveSocial recommend is that you do have a very clear policy in place about how you're going to moderate and deal with comments from citizens. We do support an agency's ability to moderate content if it is in violation with that policy, but again, you have to be very clear about what you're doing. But what we want to bring up, what we want to help with the most is the fact that outside of public records requests, your social media touches on a variety of topics that are important to citizens, and those topics might ultimately lead to a legal situation. And if you're in court, you're going to have to be able to produce that social media content. In this case, this is content that was deleted, that the city had decided to remove. So if you're removing content especially, how are you going to tell your side of the story if you haven't had the record? So you have to have record keeping, and it goes beyond public records requests. And to that point, I have just a few other situations that we know about out of our customer base. These are not highly publicized, but they are really, really intriguing situations. The first is out of South Florida, where a police department was effectively trying to do their job. They had learned about a local company that was operating in a questionable manner. A law firm had told them that the company was a scam, and the police department decided to inform the citizens about this company, called them a scam, and told citizens to avoid providing their personal information to this company. As you might imagine, the company didn't agree with being called a scam, so they contacted the police department, asked that those postings were removed. The postings were removed, and then the company came back and filed a lawsuit alleging defamation against the company. Really sticky situation, but the first thing that lawsuit asked for was for the police department to turn over every communication calling the company a scam, including the communications that had been removed. Fortunately, the city had been archiving. They're able to comply with this legal discovery request. Now, they still have to fight this legal battle, but you can just imagine what kind of hole they would be in if they couldn't even comply with the first discovery request, especially it being a public record. So again, a situation where social media is in the play of things. A records request comes in, a city is able to fulfill it and move on without it adversely affecting the operation of that department's social media site. Obviously, they'll probably stay away from going out and calling companies scams, but they're still able to use social media and benefit the citizens. Similar situation in California, where the police department again is doing their job, but this time it's even more in line with the police department doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, which is helping implement the city's gun buyback program. So they're not even going out of their way here to protect citizens. They're doing what the city has to do, which is promote this gun buyback program. And so they promote the gun buyback program, and then shortly thereafter, the NRA actually came and did a public information request about this gun buyback program, including all the content on social media. Obviously, the NRA wants to know that this program is being run in accordance with law, but it was a pretty large public information request. And we've actually published a government technology case study on this in terms of how this city really would have struggled to produce that information if they had not been archiving. And what's most interesting about this is that the city knew that they should be archiving, but had been pushing that off as a priority. And when they finally did set up a trial with us, they actually received the NRA's public information request just 3 weeks later. So it was just in time and really underscored the need to be proactive on this issue. So again, situations where police departments are doing their job, they're protecting the citizens, and stuff touches social media, becomes a legal situation, and it's important to have the record keeping in place. Finally, we can step out of law enforcement, and this touches upon any other department that's not in law enforcement. What most agencies do is they share information about community events. Well, here's a situation in Spokane, Washington, where the city was simply promoting a kayaking trip that was happening in the region. They weren't necessarily running it, but they're helping promote it. And unfortunately, somebody died on the kayaking trip. There was a lawsuit that came after that, and part of the lawsuit requested that the city produce all social media postings involved with promoting the event. The city had to go through 2 years of content. They had a limited time frame to produce this content because in the state of Washington you can be fined if you are slow to respond to public information requests. But because they were already archiving, they could turn over that information for legal discovery and then continue to utilize their social media presence largely to the benefit of the citizens, even though there is this incident that happened. So that gives you an overview of the kinds of situations that we've seen that are very in line with what most agencies, most cities and counties are doing on social media, and how important it was for agencies to be proactive on this issue, and how it really helped them continue onwards with their social media, just like you normally have to continue onwards when you have a legal situation that touches your email or anything else. So how do you move forward from relying on Facebook and Twitter? I'm going to give you a handful of options here, starting with the most basic, moving to the most sophisticated. The most basic thing you can do that doesn't cost you any money out of pocket is manually archiving. Brett mentioned that the city of West Hollywood was using manual screenshots. This is definitely something you should look at doing if you're not doing anything at all, especially if you're going to remove or hide content. Just go ahead and take a screenshot, or if you see something controversial, just go ahead and take a screenshot. A record is better than no record. And it's a great way to get started and have some kind of record. The thing to know about a screenshot, however, is that it really isn't a complete record. What you see isn't really the full electronic record. There is this issue of metadata. And just to explain this on the surface, if you look at something like a tweet has 140 characters at most. But the real electronic message that constitutes the tweet has more than 2,000 characters of information, technical metadata, and information about the content. Metadata could include user IDs, timestamps, location information. All of that is technically part of the public record. There's actually a case law in which metadata has been recognized as part of the public record. And so taking a screenshot gets you the surface level information, but having that full metadata is really important. And as we look at other archiving approaches, not all of them will take account of metadata, so it's something important to keep in mind if you want to have a complete record that protects your agency. So the data quality isn't quite what you'd want it to be from a screenshot. The other problem with a screenshot is that anybody can Photoshop anything, and so you could be challenged in court. And so it doesn't have a tremendous amount of authenticity in a screenshot. But it's a good way to get started. The real challenge is long-term. It's hard to organize screenshots. There's really no way to search for screenshots, and it becomes a pain point. So if you're serious about record keeping, and you should be, screenshots are really just a stopgap until you have some kind of record-keeping system in place. Much better than screenshots is to use something that's automated. For a number of years, these personal backup tools have existed out there. Very, very low cost. They were not necessarily built for compliance or government record keeping. Most of these tools were built for individuals to back up their own social media just so they don't lose their own content. And so very low cost and easy to get started with. The challenge with these tools is because they weren't designed for government record keeping, the fidelity of the capture is quite low. It's not as detail oriented as you want, and to be fully protected as an agency. Actually, I'll go back to the previous screenshot. A very simple capture. In fact, what I'm showing you here is a Facebook timeline. There's no way you would have known this was a Facebook timeline if you hadn't dug into the data itself. But really basic capture of the data, really hard to piece back together, really hard to search. This comes out of Backupify. So it's a very basic capture, but it gets you started. And the other thing is ultimately archiving and records management is really not about storing the data. It's about being able to produce it. And these tools provide very limited search functionality. So some of them might be $20 a year, but that's really the level of record keeping and protection you should expect out of there. They're not designed for government agencies. But it is an automated approach. If you have a limited budget and especially a very limited engagement on social media, there's probably a lower risk for you. And I would encourage you to take a look at these tools. What I would really encourage you to do, though, however, in the long term is one, develop that social media presence and be able to serve the citizens in the way that West Hollywood is. And if you're doing that, then you really need an archiving solution in place that provides comprehensive record keeping, that protects your organization, just like you archive your email, have a similar social media archive. Now, there are different classes of archiving solutions. Most solutions that you'll find are what I label all-in-one. These are typically vendors that predominantly archive one form of content, whether it's email or websites, but then they try to fit other types of content in there as a convenience. So you'll find vendors that archive email, for example, and then they take social media content and they chop it up or in other ways convert the data so that it fits into their email archive. And they may even bring in text messaging and websites and other content. And so these are very, it's very important for you to evaluate these solutions. These are true archiving solutions that have a lot of benefits. But the things you want to look out for are, is this solution doing a data conversion? If so, I'm probably having some data loss. These solutions might not have the metadata. And if they're trying to fit content into an archive that wasn't designed for social media, it's likely it'll be difficult to search and reproduce that information in a way that makes sense. So it could be really painful when you have to access the information. Those are the kinds of things I would encourage you to look at. And most archiving solutions run from a few $1,000s a year to several $1,000s and beyond. Some vendors do charge you for exporting your data and accessing your data. Some don't. So again, things to evaluate in terms of the total cost of ownership. Ultimately, when you evaluate archiving solutions, here are the 4 criteria I encourage you to evaluate to determine what's best for your agency. Frequency is getting the data as quickly as possible. Because it's out on Twitter and Facebook, you have no guarantee the data will stay there. Anything that's deleted is lost. You want to get that data in your hands as soon as possible. You want to be as comprehensive as possible because social media is a broadcast communication, and it's better for you to have more than less because of the fact it's broadcast so that you can tell your side of the story if needed. And you want to think about that metadata. Authenticity is about how good of a record is it. I mentioned that screenshots can be photoshopped. So what kind of record-keeping solution can you put in place that allows you to use that content truly as legal evidence and really will protect your agency even if challenged in court? And finally, context. This, I think, is the most overlooked attribute of any solution. Most vendors don't talk to you about context, but it's the most important thing, in my opinion, is can you make sense of your data when you need it, and can you easily access it and produce it? Can you recreate that Facebook conversation from 4 years ago that had 100 comments on it that came in over 3 weeks? Can you replay your Twitter timeline? That's ultimately what we focus on at ArchiveSocial. We're a ground-up social media archiving company built to address those 4 characteristics. What I would like to do is encourage you to one, look at our open archives that are out there. We've launched these open archives with a variety of municipalities across the country. I'm highlighting here Snohomish County. This is a county that experienced a mudslide last year. You probably heard about it in the state of Washington. But they had an immediate response on social media that helped save lives, and you can replay all of that content out of the archive. City of Austin's another archive that actually was the first city to launch an archive with us. And then we have other major governments that are launching archives, both major governments and very small cities. So it really is something to think about in terms of open government, is making that data open and available. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put my personal information on this slide. If I can be a resource to you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I also do want to give you a brief 90-second demonstration of an archive just so that you can see how it works. And I'm going to do that by pulling up the West Hollywood archive here and showing you how West Hollywood is approaching this issue. And once we conclude with that, we'll take on your questions. So what I'm sharing with you now is the online archive that Brett and the City of West Hollywood uses to ensure compliance with the Public Records Act and protect the city. And this is something that can be set up in less than an hour. And you can see that we're archiving more than 30 different sites for West Hollywood across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. We recently launched Flickr support, and we'll continue to expand the networks. But what I want to do is really focus on those 4 criteria that I mentioned. One thing to note is that we do capture the content continuously throughout the day. In fact, we do capture content from Facebook in real time. So as you evaluate archiving solutions, think about how quickly you can capture the content. You want to be comprehensive, and you want to be able to get to the content very easily. So I'm going to actually do a search here just to show you the ways that you can think about searching for social media content. You do want to be able to drill down the date ranges. You want to be able to search all of the content at one time or be able to drill down a specific type of content. So we have customers that have requests that come in that are specifically scoped to Facebook content. And so being able to do that's really important in an archiving solution. Being able to scope down to specific departments and accounts in your organization could be really helpful for you as well during a public records request. And even being able to find content based on who sent it to you and who received it. These are all the kinds of things that you would typically expect from a solution designed for public records management. And so I encourage you to look at that as you evaluate archiving vendors. Now, in our solution specifically, what we focus on the most is finding that needle in the haystack. So I'm just actually going to do a wildcard search here just to show you what it means to have that context and that authenticity as you find that needle in the haystack. City of West Hollywood has more than 40,000 records in their archive. What you can do in a solution like ours where you're really trying to solve and respond to a public records request is really drill down to the content that you're looking for. Being able to drill down to, say, comments on your Facebook photos that happened on your main City of West Hollywood page, and then being able to even drill down to some time way back in the past. Doing that very easily is really important in archiving solutions. So again, as you evaluate solutions, look at how easy those solutions make it for you to find content, not just store it. Now, when you find that content, I mentioned this characteristic of context. I've narrowed this down to comments on Facebook, but a comment by itself isn't that useful. So what I'm going to do is find a comment that I'm looking at here and actually replay that conversation. I can bring up the other comment that happened on it. I can look at that full photo that was posted and have that context so I can make sense of it. That's really important. And then ultimately, once you find what you're looking for, an archiving system should allow you to get that content out as a PDF or some other format. So these are the kinds of things that archiving technology has made possible today, and this is how West Hollywood's approaching it. And finally, I want to just highlight this issue of authenticity. You can see that this is a Facebook post that's maybe a sentence long, but here's the metadata. I'm about to bring it up on my screen behind this post. You can see it's a lot of technical information. So again, an archiving solution that has all of this technical information and protects it in case it's needed in a legal situation. It's really important to look for that in a solution. So it's a real-life example of an archiving technology that fulfills those criteria. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Morgan so that we can address questions.
Outstanding, Anil. As you guys saw, this has been anything but boring today. So, hey, folks, we're close to our time today. We've got about 10 minutes left. But let's jump right into some questions here real quick. Make sure you keep answering your questions. Hey, Brett, we're going to go first one to you from Judy Montenegro. Asks the City of Downey, I believe, says, does WeHo have a social media policy in place? If so, can you please share? I know that we probably can't share it over this. Might be able to send it out later. But talk about your social media policy, maybe how you guys came out with it and kind of the things it addresses.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. We adopted our social media policy back in 2011. That was, of course, after about a year of hashing it out with the city attorney on what language we wanted in there. It does address, like, how we approach social media, why we do it, the do's and don'ts, Brown Act considerations, and it is available on our website. If you just go to our website at weho.org, type in social media, it's going to be the first or second link you'll find there. I will say this. One thing that I get asked often is, does your social media policy address employee personal use of their social media accounts? And I'm just going to say it does not, because we have a couple of administrative regulations already in place that kind of cover that topic, so we didn't want to be too redundant with that. So it does not address employee personal use of social media.
Oh, great. Hey, and Anil, this is kind of a two-part question. I want to tee up this for you because we've had a couple questions. One came from Kalina Hahn. Says if they're currently using a different company and they're not satisfied with their product, which obviously you'd like to fulfill that, but they're asking how easy is it to transfer the service to ArchiveSocial? And while you're there, Anil, why don't you tell people real quickly about, I know one of the questions is going to be about cost, so why don't we just kind of combine both questions there?
Sure thing. Kalina, I'm sorry to hear that you're not having an ideal experience with the other company. What we do is we allow folks to get set up online. Again, it takes less than an hour. Honestly, it often takes less than 20 or 30 minutes just to connect your social media sites. And then we pull your content from the beginning of time, every piece of content that we can possibly get to. And so that's really the capability that can account for the fact that you're moving from one company to another, is that we'll go back and pull it again. The issue that we've seen with most other vendors is that they're not keeping an authentic record. Ideally, we would take in their data, but it's generally at a much lower fidelity than what we've captured it as. We were really the first company to come out with authentic capture, the native record from the social media sites. But we will go back in time and get that data very quickly for you and get you back up to speed. We've had several customers do that and have seen that the content that we pull from the past history gets them at least up to, if not better than where they were with a vendor that was not specifically focused on this problem like we are. And to get up and running with us in terms of costs, our solution has been, we've designed our price point for government because this is the industry that we work with. Government is everything we do. We've designed the price point to be under $5,000 annual. It's a fixed cost, no other hidden fees or expenses, under $5,000 annual for the vast majority of cities. If you have a really high volume presence, some of our customers like the City of Chicago, City of Austin, they're in higher price points. But most cities and counties under $5,000 annual, we even have lower price points than that. Very cost effective. And one of the things that I would suggest to you, Kalina, is we have a sample your archive button on our homepage. It takes less than 60 seconds, literally, to create an archive with us to see how it works. I'd encourage you to try that out, and we'd certainly be able to help. Would like to help you make a transition if you're interested in one.
Great. Hey, and this next question comes from Debbie, and I hope I get this right, Pedrazoli. Asking a great question, too. And this is actually, Brett, let's start with you, see what your policy is, and Anil, let's see what kind of experiences you've had. But she asks, if you retweet somebody else's tweet, does that also become your public record? Brett, how do you guys handle that?
The way we look at that is if we retweet, sorry, that's a tongue twister. Yeah, we would consider that part of our records. And I'm not sure if ArchiveSocial catches that. I'm assuming they would. Anil?
Definitely. We definitely, I agree with you on that, Brett. That's exactly the way to look at it, and we do capture that content. What we do to draw that line is go back to email as an analogy. Anything you send or receive, typically the public records laws are written to say sent or received. And so you retweeting something is kind of like you as a city forwarding out an email that you got to the general public. It is something you've now communicated on behalf of the city and therefore is a public record.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Great. Hey, this next one comes from, and I'm not sure I got the first name right, looks like TP Humbarger. But, hey, Brett, this question's for you. Have you ever considered cross-posting on LinkedIn? I don't know that you mentioned that or if you guys do that, because he's asking it says, it seems many of your citizens are on that platform too. Have you guys ever considered doing that? Or if you do, what do you cross-post?
Got it. That's a good question. Well, I'm assuming since he asked, or she asked, can't tell, they probably noticed that we do have a presence on LinkedIn, and we are currently considering upping our engagement on that platform. At this point, we're hashing out which division we want to kind of carry the flag for us on LinkedIn, whether that's going to be human resources as more of like a job posting type resource, or is it going to go back to communications? We're just trying to hash that out. So we currently are not, but we are certainly looking into that.
Hey, and Brett, one more quick question for you from John Barilloni, who actually was smart. He typed me and told me how to pronounce his last name so I wouldn't butcher it. Way to go, John. You get the award for today. So question for you, Brett. For WeHo, it's pretty easy to ID who your community is, what they like, etc. He's asking for smaller cities with fewer admin resources. How do you start identifying your audience, and what kind of tone works best for city social media posts? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, finding out where the conversations are and like what hashtags they're using, I will admit that we have it kind of easy here at West Hollywood in that regard because West Hollywood is known as WeHo, so it was kind of a no-brainer that people are going to be hashtagging WeHo in addition to just hashtag West Hollywood. The best thing to do is just, start monitoring keywords that have to do with your city. And I think eventually, over time, you're going to see how people are categorizing their tweets. And from that point on, those are the keywords you want to have on your social media monitoring dashboard if you use one. That's our approach to that.
Okay, that's great. Hey, Anil, this one's really quick for you, and then, folks, we're probably going to have a couple minutes left. But this is a great one from Sherry Heerbaum. Says, is there an easy archive retrieval based upon hashtags and image tags, for example, all images of John Doe, or can we see how that info is pulled up?
That's a great question. So in our system, as we capture content, either the content that you're putting out or receiving, if it has a hashtag in it, that is something that we what was called indexing. We put it in our search index, just like Google. And so if you search for that in our interface or one of our open archives, it will match against both the hashtag as well as the rest of the content in the post.
Great. And folks, we probably got time maybe for one, maybe two more questions, so I'm going to kind of combine a couple here. So John Barilloni again, and then Debbie Pedrozzoli. So we talk about the legality of deleting public comments, like if you have a social media policy that spells out when, where, why deletions happen. Is it okay to capture a comment prior to deleting it as long as you're keeping the record? And then that really gets into government record retention, period established for social media. Or is it up to the jurisdiction to define, Brett, like in California? So, hey, let's kind of talk about the legality of deleting things and then talk about the record retention. Let's go to you first, Brett. Let's get your thoughts on it real quick.
Well, with regard to deleting comments, we definitely do that on occasion. And ArchiveSocial, which is a great resource for this, is pretty on the ball when it comes to activity on our Facebook page. Let's just assume we're talking about Facebook here. So that comment is captured like almost on the fly. So all we do is just give it a few moments, and then if it meets the criteria that allows us to delete the comment, which is all addressed in our social media policy, we'll delete it. But we still have that record in our ArchiveSocial archive.
And Anil, let's get your thoughts on that too, because I know you've dealt with tons of agencies that have asked exactly the same question.
Yes, definitely. And part of John's question is about just having a policy and the legality of then moderating to that policy. You do want to get that policy right. There's been a lot of discussion in the space about where to draw the line. Typically, the guidance comes out to say if it's on topic, even if it's negative but it's on topic, you want to be careful with moderating. But if it's completely off topic, and especially if it's profane or offensive, you can certainly moderate. When it's moderated, removed, it is okay to do that, but you absolutely do need the record, especially if the content was meaningful under your retention schedules. And so having an archiving solution in place to capture everything and allow you to delete is really helpful. As Brett said, we do capture Facebook content in real time, the vast majority of communications across Facebook. Not every network is real time, but we do have an Archive Now button. So one of the practices our customers employ is if they're ready to delete or remove something, just check the archive real quick. If it's there, it's great. If it's not, hit the Archive Now button. It'll be there, and then you can go ahead and moderate and know that you have the record.
Well, perfect. And look, folks, we've got several more questions. I apologize. I mean, this is great Q&A. We've got some of the most Q&A we've had in any of our sessions. Unfortunately, we can't get to those questions today, so we're going to have to wrap here. So I want to be respectful of our time. So in closing, I want to thank everybody because you guys have gave us the most precious thing you have, which is your time. Big thank you needs to go to my fellow speakers, Anil Chawla and Brett White. These guys have done such an amazing job. And obviously, thank you to our sponsor for ArchiveSocial. And folks, remember, we talked about you'll get a survey that's going to pop up at the end here. But, hey, look, remember now, in the next 48 hours, we'll provide all attendees with the link to the recording for your reference. Share it with your colleagues. But more importantly, anything else, like I said, just have fun with social media. Make sure you got a good policy in place. But more importantly, just start doing it. Everybody have fun. And we want to thank you for sharing your time with us today. We look forward to seeing you on another webinar. Everybody have a great day.